In the year 1987, the Amazon rainforest remained a wilderness, largely untouched by humankind, a living continent of green, stretching endlessly, swallowing rivers, mountains, and valleys in silence. Maps of South America showed vast patches of blank space deep inside the basin, labeled simply as unexplored. Satellites tried to peer through the layers of leaves, but the canopy was too thick. Nature, it seemed, had built her own shield against discovery. Into this untouched world stepped a man who craved what others feared. Jonathan Creed, age 39. Born in Colorado, raised among the mountains, was no ordinary traveler. He was an explorer in the truest sense, a man driven not by glory or money, but by an obsession with going further than anyone else. His notebooks from earlier journeys tell of deserts that nearly swallowed him whole, cliffs that almost broke his bones, and seas that tested his lungs. Yet none of those trials satisfied him. He wanted the forbidden, the unseen. For years, Jonathan studied every scrap of information about the Amazon, faded missionary journals, half-burned maps from rubber barons, and whispered tales from indigenous guides. All spoke of a heartland so wild, so hostile, that even the bravest tribes kept away. In January 1987, he decided that was exactly where he belonged, carrying only the bare essentials: machetes, ropes, a compass, a rifle, basic medical supplies, and a thick leather journal. He stepped off a boat and into the forest. Locals warned him not to go. They told him stories of men who vanished without a trace, of rivers that looped back on themselves, of voices in the canopy. Jonathan only smiled, his eyes burning with the hunger of someone who had already chosen his fate. The first days felt almost welcoming. The air was heavy but alive, filled with the calls of scarlet, macaws and howler monkeys that roared like distant thunder. Orchids bloomed in colors so vibrant they seemed almost artificial. Butterflies the size of a man's palm drifted through shafts of sunlight. To Jonathan, it was paradise. He wrote pages upon pages, sketching birds, pressing leaves between the sheets of his journal. He marveled at how rivers split into silver threads, then reunited as though the jungle itself were weaving a living tapestry. But even in those early days, signs of the jungle's darker nature appeared. His boots sank into soil so wet it seemed to breathe. At night he heard things move, heavy bodies snapping branches, unseen eyes glinting from the undergrowth. Once he woke to find his tent surrounded by glowing orbs in the darkness, which vanished the moment he lit his lantern. Fireflies, he told himself. But his handwriting in the journal that night was shaky, uncertain. Jonathan believed he had entered on his own terms. But the forest had its own rules. It welcomed him like a host invites a guest, smiling, patient but always watching. He was, though he didn't yet realize it, not the explorer of this land, but its captive. His journal's first warning reads simply, "The jungle is not silent. It whispers, it waits." By the time Jonathan reached his 27th day inside the rainforest, the Amazon had already begun to turn from paradise into a labyrinth. What seemed endless beauty in the first weeks now shifted into something far more sinister. Paths he thought he had mapped would curl back into themselves. A full day's march often ended where it began, as if the forest were folding its arms to keep him locked inside. The compass needle spun without reason. His maps became useless, mere paper drenched in humidity. Even the rivers betrayed him. He would paddle for hours, only to find himself drifting past the same fallen log, the same bend in the bank, as though water itself was conspiring against him. Jonathan wrote, "This is not a jungle. This is a maze with no exit." At night, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew so heavy that breathing felt like pulling smoke into the lungs. There was a strange perfume lingering in the air, sweet at first, then sour, making his stomach turn. He later identified its source, a tree he named Mortea venenum, whose flowers released invisible toxins strong enough to cloud the mind. That was when the hallucinations began. He saw movements in the trees, figures shaped like people, faces carved of shadow. Once he swore he saw an entire tribe watching him from the tree line, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. When he raised his lantern, they vanished, leaving nothing but twisted vines. Another time he saw his own reflection in a puddle, but when he bent down, the reflection did not move. It simply stared back at him. Food became treacherous. Bright fruits glistening like jewels tempted him, but one bite burned his tongue and left his lips numb. Even the water turned hostile. Streams crawled with parasites, leeches, and the dreaded candiru, fish small enough to invade the body through tiny openings. Jonathan boiled every drop he drank. Yet still he suffered from fever, shaking through the nights with cold sweats. Worse were the sounds. During daylight, the forest screamed with life. Monkeys, insects, frogs, but when night fell, silence would descend like a blanket. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of something listening. On the 30th night, Jonathan heard his name whispered through the canopy. Not once, but 3 times, each louder than the last, as though the forest itself was calling him deeper. His body weakened. His arms carried scratches from thorned vines that sliced skin like blades. Biting insects swarmed him, leaving angry welts that festered into sores. His clothes rotted in the damp air, and the smell of mildew clung to him like a second skin. Yet despite the misery, Jonathan pushed forward. He was an adventurer, but he was also stubborn. He refused to believe the jungle could beat him. He pressed his journal against his chest each night like a lifeline, writing even when his hands shook. One entry from this period stands out, written in cramped, uneven letters. "The forest doesn't want me to leave. I feel it circling me, twisting me back to its heart. I entered freely, but I will not leave freely, not unless the jungle allows it." Jonathan had walked into the green abyss as a conqueror. Now he was beginning to realize he was the conquered. By the time Jonathan reached his 80th day, the jungle had stripped him of every illusion. It was no longer trees and rivers. It was a living fortress of predators. Every sound, every shadow, every movement in the undergrowth carried the weight of danger. It began with the silence. One morning, the rainforest's usual orchestra of shrieks and calls suddenly fell quiet. Jonathan's instinct screamed at him. Animals do not go silent without reason. And then he saw it, a shadow sliding out of the river mist. A black caiman nearly 18 feet long, scales glistening like whetstone, eyes burning amber. It moved toward his campfire with terrifying grace. Jonathan raised his rifle and fired. The bullet hit but did not stop it. The beast lunged, snapping branches with its jaws. 2 more shots cracked through the jungle before it collapsed, its massive body shaking the earth. Jonathan survived, but the tremor in his hands never left. From then on, predators stalked him as if the jungle had chosen him as prey. At night, he felt the weight of something watching. Paw prints the size of dinner plates appeared outside his tent. The hunter revealed itself on the 95th night, a jaguar larger than any recorded, its eyes glowing red in the lantern light. Jonathan described it as the red-eyed demon of the forest. It didn't attack directly. It circled him, vanishing into the undergrowth, then reappearing days later, always at a distance. It was not hunting for food, it was hunting for dominance. Jonathan admitted in his journal that he felt like an intruder, trespassing in a kingdom where this beast was king, but the small creatures nearly destroyed him. On day 102, while gathering firewood, he stepped into a nest of fer-de-lance vipers, snakes so venomous, they are known as the 3-step killers. One struck his calf before he managed to hack it apart with his machete. His leg swelled to twice its size, purple veins snaking upward. With sheer will and a crude herbal remedy he remembered from a Peruvian shaman, he survived, but the wound left him limping for weeks. Even rivers became death traps. His canoe flipped on day 115, throwing him into black water thick with electric eels. The shocks numbed his chest, paralyzed his arms. He barely managed to grab a floating branch, clinging until dawn, his body shaking violently from the aftershocks. But the worst horror came not from reptiles or cats, but from insects. On day 110, his camp was overrun by a swarm of bullet ants. Giant ants whose sting causes pain, described as worse than being shot. They poured over his body, biting, stinging, flooding into his clothes. Jonathan screamed into the night, his cries swallowed by the forest. For hours he lay convulsing, half delirious, fever burning through him. His journal from that period is nearly illegible. The ink smudged, the handwriting broken, but one line is clear. They are not insects. They are soldiers. The forest defends itself. His body carried scars, but it was his mind that suffered most. He began to dream of the creatures long after they were gone. Dreams of red eyes, writhing snakes, and 1,000 jaws snapping shut. He was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. By the 140th day, Jonathan had traveled deeper than he ever imagined. The canopy above had grown so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. The forest floor was cloaked in twilight even at noon, and the air felt heavier, as though he were walking at the bottom of an ocean of green. This was a world sealed from time. The jungle here seemed older, stranger, as if it belonged to an age before humans. Vines thicker than tree trunks coiled upward like serpents. The ground oozed with strange fungi that glowed faintly blue, creating an otherworldly shimmer in the darkness. Jonathan named them Bioluma Mortis, the light of the dead. At night, entire valleys pulsed with their glow, turning the jungle into an endless cathedral of ghostly fire. It was here, deep inside the Forbidden Heart, that Jonathan found proof of something greater than nature alone. Half buried in the earth and strangled by roots stood a stone structure, a wall, perhaps part of a temple. Its carvings depicted beings half human, half beast, their faces twisted into masks of agony, serpent-bodied figures coiled around human heads. Jonathan pressed his hands to the stones, feeling the chill of ages. In his journal, he wrote, "These walls speak of civilizations lost before history. The jungle is not just alive, it remembers." The deeper he wandered, the more unnatural things became. He stumbled upon trees whose trunks bore what looked like faces, contorted, screaming as though people had been swallowed into the bark itself. At night, he swore he heard those faces whisper, their mouths opening in the flicker of torchlight. Even stranger was the sound of chanting. One evening, while following a narrow trail through the undergrowth, Jonathan heard rhythmic voices, low and hollow like a funeral hymn. He followed the sound for hours, pushing through vines and thorned brush, only to find himself in a clearing completely empty, except for a circle of stones blackened by fire, as if a ritual had been performed not long ago. The voices stopped the moment he stepped into the clearing. His journal entries from these days grew increasingly fragmented. Words trailed off mid-sentence. Pages were marked with mud and ash. In one shaky entry, he wrote, "Something walks with me. Not an animal. Not a man. I hear its breath in the dark." Hunger gnawed at him, but food here was cursed. The plants dripped with toxic sap. He watched a bright-colored frog leap across his path, leaving a trail of venom so strong that the grass beneath it turned black. Even fish in the streams bore grotesque growths, tumors glowing faintly under his lantern. Jonathan began to wonder if this part of the forest was contaminated, or if it was simply too ancient for human biology to survive. On the 160th day, Jonathan's entries became almost unreadable. His handwriting slanted, his words feverish. "The jungle calls me deeper. The whispers promise escape if I surrender. The light is wrong. The trees breathe. I am inside something that is alive." His final complete entry came on day 163. It was short, chilling, and final. "The jungle has accepted me. To leave is to betray it." Jonathan had crossed from explorer to captive, and from captive to servant of the green abyss. On the 163rd day, Jonathan Creed stumbled out of the Amazon as if spat out by the forest itself. His body was a ruin, his skin torn by thorns, arms and legs crawling with scars and insect bites. His clothes had rotted into rags, his beard tangled and streaked with mildew. Locals near Manaus, Brazil, said he looked like a walking corpse, his eyes sunken yet burning with a strange feverish light. He carried almost nothing from his expedition. His rifle was gone. His compass was broken. His supplies had long since rotted away. The only object clutched tightly in his trembling hands was his leather-bound journal soaked with sweat, blood and jungle mold, yet miraculously intact. Doctors tried to stabilize him. They fed him broth, treated his wounds, and urged him to rest. But Jonathan refused to speak of what he had seen. When pressed, he would whisper fragments. "Faces in the trees. The red-eyed demon. The jungle remembers." At night, he screamed in his sleep, thrashing violently as if fighting invisible attackers. Nurses reported that his skin twitched in strange places, like something moving beneath it. 15 days later, Jonathan was found dead in his hotel room. There was no blood, no visible wound. The official report cited fever and exhaustion. Yet witnesses swore his body told a different story. His eyes were wide open, pupils dilated as if locked in terror. His mouth was twisted in a silent scream. The strangest detail, his hands were clenched so tightly around his journal that it took hours to pry them open. Inside that journal were 163 days of horror, sketches of beasts no scientist could identify, notes about toxic plants, diagrams of ruins swallowed by vines. But the last dozen pages were different. Broken sentences, frantic scrawls, words that seemed less written and more clawed into the paper. Some passages were unreadable, smeared with what looked like ash or dried blood. Scholars and explorers debated endlessly. Was Jonathan hallucinating from toxins? Had fever driven him mad? Or had he truly uncovered a piece of the Amazon that humans were never meant to enter? Today, his journal rests inside a sealed glass case at a museum in New York City. Visitors know it by name. The Forbidden Green, a journal from beyond the map. The book draws thousands each year, displayed under dim light. Its leather cover warped by time. Many who stand before it swear. They feel a strange coldness pressing against their skin. Some claim to hear faint scratching noises coming from the pages, like claws raking over wood. A few insist they've seen the ink shift, as if words are still being written. The curators dismiss these as imagination, yet guards speak of sleepless nights, of footsteps echoing through the empty halls after midnight, always circling the glass case. And the Amazon itself? It remains unchanged, still guarding its secrets. Satellites still cannot see into the region Jonathan described. No expedition has dared to return to that exact place. The jungle waits patient as ever, its silence hiding the truth. Because Jonathan Creed may have escaped its borders, but the jungle never let him go. It followed him, consumed him, and perhaps, through his journal, still reaches out today. Some places on Earth are not meant for maps. Some truths are not meant for man. And the Amazon is one of them.